Hello, welcome to Mike's Mass Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pishota, and happy Thursday night to you. And we have one piece of news, and it's a big one. The Mets have signed or come to agreement pending a physical with JD Martinez, the 36-year-old veteran DH, finally signing with the Mets. After a long courtship, there was another deal on the table where the Angels were also looking into signing Martinez. Ultimately, he decides to go east instead of west, and now he is signed with the New York Mets. They have a legitimate DH, a middle of the order hitter that can really protect some of those hitters like Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso, of course. So Martinez signing late. He's not going to have a lot of time to acclimate to his new surroundings because spring training nearly over, and he's going to be traveling with the team when they start opening day soon. But it's certainly a major acquisition for the Mets. Martinez coming off a great year last year in 2023 with the Los Angeles Dodgers. He was blessed with a great lineup that hit in. Obviously had former MVPs Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman hitting in the same order as him. So he had a lot of opportunities to drive in runs, get on base, and do a lot for the team. Ultimately, didn't finish with a very high WAR, and that's going to be expected because this wasn't really. He is a full time DH, so what you're expecting really at these points in his career is just for him to kind of do his job, hit what he can. He signs for a 1 year, $12 million contract. Pretty cheap comparing to what his level of contract was expected to be. I think people were expecting somewhere maybe in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 million. But the market not really great to JD. For a 36-year-old DH, wasn't really getting a lot of interest, and a lot of teams were not really willing to throw the money at him. Ultimately, it came down to just two teams, as I mentioned before. The Angels and the Mets were the last two teams standing, really. And he's, as I said, coming off a pretty bounce back season, honestly, where he batted 271, had finished with a 572 slugging percentage, hit 33 home runs, 103 RBIs in just 113 games. Was named to the All-Star team last year. This is the third consecutive season that he did that. So he is pretty set, and a guy who's going to really help this team. A guy who can provide average and power easily and can play as much or as little as possible for the team. And he's really going to provide an offensive burst for this Mets team that honestly was going to be entering this year with a few more question marks than really you would feel comfortable with. It's a 1 year deal. He's not going to be around for very long. We expect that if the Mets aren't playing that well either by the midseason, that he might also be trade bait. So that's also a possibility. But his acquisition, if this team is trying to make the playoffs, and they have made it clear that they are not really interested in what we might call "quote unquote" punting on the season. They want to make it competitive. They don't want to scare off their fan base who are saying like, "Oh, well, this team's not even going to try this year. They're going to be looking towards the next year when they have more free agent space and they can go after guys like major free agents like Juan Soto, who's going to be the prize prospect." But this is going to be an interesting season. We've now added another player who I was talking about this earlier today, where Pete Alonso is now going to have a hitter batting behind him who has legitimate abilities, and there's no question of, well, he might do well. Well, there's a good chance he might do this or he might do that. And we were looking at Francisco Alvarez as the potential five hitter on that team. You move JD Martinez to batting behind Pete Alonso. All of a sudden, Pete Alonso's got the best protection that he's had in years. I'll say back to 2019 when he had another JD Davis batting behind him, and guys like Dom Smith and others. So he was in the middle of a pretty loaded lineup in the middle of that, and not coincidentally, he also hit 53 home runs that year. So keep that in mind. So I think we're going to be heading towards a great Pete year because he's going to finally have lineup protection between Martinez and Alvarez behind him. Those are two legitimate 30 home run powerhouses who are they're not going to want to put Alonso in front of him. They're going to have to be throwing a lot of pitches over the strike zone, and might explode, and we might be looking at a huge Pete Alonso year if he's getting a lot of pitches to hit. I can't wait to see it. How soon Martinez is going to be available, still kind of a question mark. As I mentioned before, they do still have to confirm his health, whether or not he's going to pass a physical. But all indications seem to be that, yeah, he can definitely get to that point. There's no question that he is one of the best power hitters in baseball over the last few years. And you can go back, very far in his career. And I was looking back in his career earlier this week because it was the possibility, the specter of the Mets signing him. So I was looking at his stats, and he has had an amazing run over these last 6-7 years in the league. I mean, pretty much since he breaks out in 2015 as an All-Star, makes his first All-Star campaign, his 38 home runs that year, and then he's just off the races for the next period over, mostly with Boston, and has that brief stay over in Arizona where he hits an insane amount, and then Boston signs him. They get a legitimate powerhouse DH in the middle of their lineup, a team that did end up going to the World Series and won the World Series in 2018 with JD Martinez. So that was another. He did play a part on that team as well. So keep that in mind. So this guy also has postseason experience. He's played with Boston, also Arizona, and then very briefly with LA last year before they got eliminated. He had a home run that series with LA during that NLDS against Arizona. So he comes with a lot of certainly attention being paid to him. This is a guy who is not going to have a lot of time. We're hoping that he kept in shape and was staying up to date with everything that he had to do in terms of his baseball activities while he was waiting to get signed by a team. So he's going to have to very quickly ramp it up if he wants to be ready by early. Well, actually, late March will be the case when the Mets actually start their season on March 28th, very soon next week. So JD will not have a ton of time to prepare, but we expect that he'll probably get at least one, maybe 2 games in spring training before he's ready to start the year. And the Mets go to face the Milwaukee Brewers next week. So with only 5 games left to play. So we might see him potentially debut this weekend. It remains to be seen when exactly he's going to be activated for the team and when he'll first suit up. But I'm hoping he'll get at least 1, maybe 2 games in before he has to start starting next week. And again, pending a physical, we're just waiting for that to happen. But man, oh man, to acquire a guy like this this late in the season, there's certainly questions as to whether or not he's going to start this year slow. I think he might. There's always potential. There's also going to be the factor that he is going to be taking over the DH spot. It is a blow to Mark Vientos, who was the projected primary designated hitter for the Mets this year. He's obviously going to see a lot fewer opportunities. And where exactly Vientos ends up, hard to say. He hasn't had an amazing spring training, but it is a blow to Vientos, and I felt like he was hitting pretty decently at the very least. And I was looking forward to seeing him see what he could do over a full season. But when you add this guy in, he's going to bump them up now to a legitimate wild card contender. They have to be projected now. I have to look at the projections for the Mets if the Pagoda projection is going to change at all. But it should push them up to a third place finish. They have to be the favorites now to finish third in the NL East. There are some whispers that the Phillies might not be able to replicate their success from last year, and if the Mets can get off to a good enough start, and depending on how well the pitching is, if your pitching is going to be this suspect for the season, and as well as they've all looked in spring training so far, there are a lot of questions with this Mets pitching staff. So I think if you are going to have a lot of questions with your pitching staff, the best thing you can do is reorientate your lineup and make sure that they can at least score a lot of runs for you. And we were just watching this, absolute breakneck back and forth slugfest between the Padres and the Dodgers. And granted, it's probably not going to be the case outside of Seoul, Korea, but I'm really interested to see whether or not the Mets can kind of compare these offensive behemoths like the Dodgers and, of course, the Atlanta Braves, the Philadelphia Phillies, and the San Diego Padres, who they're all going to be in the mix, and seeing exactly how the Mets can stand up to those guys. It really helps if they acquire a legitimate star, a guy who has had a lot of success, a guy who's a multi-time All-Star, multi-time Silver Slugger winner, a guy who has plenty of veteran experience and leadership and can provide a lot of ability for this team. He's it was a slam dunk acquisition. I'm glad they waited him out. I'm glad they saw there was a potential to get him at a cheaper price if they just waited. And JD Martinez, I think he made the absolute correct decision to come here, stay away from the Los Angeles Angels, and that complete cluster. You know what? So staying away from that, probably a good move for him, and coming to the New York scene and potentially getting a little bit more visibility and staying on the East Coast. I think it's a good move for JD. I think he'll like it here. I think he's going to fit in really nicely with this group of guys, and having him in the middle of that lineup is going to really open up a lot of things for a lot of the Mets star players already. He's going to provide a great protection to Lindor and Alonso and McNeil and Nimmo. Like, to have that guy driving in runs, batting presumably fifth in this lineup, it's going to be a world of change. And I as much as it hurts guys like Vientos and maybe others who are looking to take over that DH spot, it really does do a lot more for the Mets if they're putting in a legitimate star, a legitimate guy who can be expected to hit probably 30 home runs, 100 RBIs a year, and has been that way for the last few years. So you're not really getting a question mark. You're getting more of an exclamation point to say. So this was definitely an exclamation point signing for the Mets. Acquiring JD Martinez. Welcome to Flushing, JD.
Thank you for listening to Mike's Mets podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike's Mets Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.